There's a particular kind of raw, uncomfortable pain that many of us don't like to admit openly, as it leaves us vulnerable and embarrassed. It's the pain of watching someone else have something that you don't, and knowing, deep down, that you never will. The truth is, looks, money, luck, and circumstances aren't handed out fairly. Some people are born with advantages that others will spend their entire lives trying to compensate for and never quite manage. Envy starts when we become aware of this, when someone else's existence becomes an uncomfortable reminder of our own limitations. Most of us try to hide from this feeling quickly. We disguise it as indifference or criticism. We tell ourselves that successful people are shallow, that beautiful people are vain, that fortunate people don't deserve what they have. It's easier to find flaws in others than to face the uncomfortable reality that we're powerless to close the distance between their life and ours. But envy doesn't disappear when we condemn it or try to rationalize it away. It waits patiently until awoken by scrolling through someone's photos, overhearing a story of a friend's good fortune, or watching an associate navigate the world with a confidence that feels impossible for us. And when it happens, it feels like a kick to the heart. No philosopher understood this feeling more instinctively than Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who spent his life trying to make sense of this difficult emotion. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in Danzig, now Gdansk, to a wealthy merchant father and a mother who would later become a celebrated novelist. His father, Heinrich, was proud and demanding, a man who believed that business built character and that every comfort should be earned through discipline. His mother, Joanna, was quite different, social, witty, drawn to art and intellectual conversation. From his mother, he inherited intelligence and a sharp mind. From his father, severity and a dark outlook. It was a volatile combination. Schopenhauer grew up surrounded by wealth and refinement, but not much warmth. The household was comfortable but cold. They lived well, travelled extensively, and entertained important guests, but genuine affection was scarce. Arthur learned early that love was something he had to earn through talent and intelligence. It left him both ambitious and easily wounded, always seeking approval but never quite believing he received it. When his father died, likely by his own hand, his mother moved to Weimar, the cultural heart of Germany. There she found a life she'd always wanted, lively, admired, at the centre of intellectual society. She hosted salons filled with poets, artists and thinkers. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, the nation's most celebrated poet and intellectual, was a frequent guest. Schopenhauer was not. Goethe was everything his mother adored, elegant, worldly, the perfect combination of intellect and social grace. Arthur admired him, envied him, and resented him all at once. What irritated him most was Goethe's effortless confidence, his natural way of belonging in the world. Schopenhauer attended some of those gatherings, sitting quietly at the edges while laughter and conversation filled the room. His intensity was poorly suited to social settings. He found it exhausting and later called society the noise of the trivial. But behind that contempt lay envy, not for Goethe's fame or charm, but for his comfort in existence. Schopenhauer never felt that way. He was always pushing against the world, never moving with it. In Weimar, he saw what it meant to belong, and he knew he didn't. It's a feeling many people recognise, though few name it directly. The sense of watching life happen from behind a glass wall. Others seem to flow easily through the world while he remains slightly apart, too aware, too self-conscious, somehow out of rhythm with everyone else. That sense of exclusion stayed with him. He carried it with him everywhere he went. In his 30s, Schopenhauer began lecturing at the University of Berlin. It was there that he encountered Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, the philosopher whose name was revered and whose popularity was enormous. Hegel's lectures overflowed with students, his books were widely read, his reputation was vast. And through Hegel, a familiar feeling was reawakened in Schopenhauer, the same envy he'd once felt towards Goethe. Hegel was everything Schopenhauer was not, admired, confident, secure in his place in the order of things. He represented the kind of life Schopenhauer could never enter, a world of recognition, belonging, and ease. So Schopenhauer tried to challenge him. He scheduled his own lectures at the exact same hours as Hegel's, convinced that students would recognize brilliance when they heard it. Almost none did. Schopenhauer's classroom sat nearly empty while Hegel's was packed. The humiliation was complete. He felt dismissed and erased, a man with genuine insight condemned to speak to vacant chairs. It was more than professional rivalry. It was a collapse of self-belief. He never forgave the world for choosing someone else. It's a strangely relatable story. Most of us have a version of Hegel in our lives, someone who seems effortlessly embraced by a world that barely notices us. We tell ourselves their success is undeserved, but privately we're haunted by the knowledge that doors open for them that remain firmly closed to us. Schopenhauer's envy hardened his philosophy. He left the university, retreated into solitude, and began to write about the indifference of life, the futility of striving, and the cruelty of comparison. He turned humiliation into inquiry, his personal pain into a systematic investigation of human suffering. And from that wound came the insight that would shape the rest of his life, that to be human is to desire what cannot be attained, and to suffer when confronted with those who have attained it. In his earlier works, Schopenhauer came to believe that beneath everything, every ambition, every love, every struggle, lies a blind force that he called the will to live. This will drives all creatures to survive, compete, and desire. It isn't noble and it isn't rational. It simply wants, endlessly, automatically, without purpose or direction. He saw it everywhere, in nature's violence, in human ambition, in our inability to rest even when things are good. The will keeps us reaching, hungering, imagining a better version of whatever moment we're in. It never stops pushing us forward. He wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Pain when we lack what we want, boredom when we finally have it. And between the two, only brief, fragile moments of satisfaction that quickly fade. We might recognize this rhythm, the subtle dissatisfaction that creeps in once a goal is achieved. The promotion, the purchase, the new relationship, each eventually loses its shine, followed by the faint hum of wanting something else. That restless hum is what Schopenhauer meant by the will. It doesn't seek happiness but continuation. It doesn't ask, what will fulfill me, but what can I want next? This endless movement, he believed, is the root of suffering. We're built to desire more than we can ever possess, to imagine a life that can never quite exist. For Schopenhauer, envy is the moment when the will becomes self-aware, when we see someone else living more fully, more freely, more easily. We feel the tension of our own limits. Nothing has actually been taken from us, yet we feel robbed. It's the will looking at itself through the lens of another person's fortune and recognizing its own failure. That feeling is familiar to anyone who has watched another person receive effortlessly what they themselves have struggled for. The envy that arises isn't about the thing itself, not the lover, the house, or the job, but about the ease with which it comes to others while remaining impossible to us. It's the will observing that its own energy, its own effort, and its own value has failed to produce the same result. Schopenhauer's insight was that this pain isn't a character flaw, it's built into the structure of life itself. The will creates desire, but also traps us within it. The more clearly we see this, the harder it becomes to believe in fairness or self-determination. He believed we are born with certain inclinations, talents, and limitations. We can work within those parameters, but we can't fundamentally change them. We see someone with a nature that produces outcomes we want, but we cannot simply choose to have their nature. We can only have ours. That's why envy cuts so deep. It exposes not only what we lack, but what we can never have. It's the humiliation of powerlessness, the painful knowledge that some things are simply out of reach no matter what we do. While others attract and enjoy them with ease, we must look on helplessly from afar. Schopenhauer saw this not as cause for despair, but as truth. For him, the idea that everything is possible through hard work was a form of denial. He believed the mature mind accepts the limits of its will and finds dignity not in success but in endurance. He was among the first Western thinkers to engage deeply with Eastern philosophy, reading the Upanishads and Buddhist texts that describe life as suffering born of desire. In them he found confirmation of what he already sensed, that peace comes not from fulfilling the will, but from quieting it. The goal, in Schopenhauer's view, wasn't to expand one's possibilities, but to live peacefully within them. We can feel this in moments when our wanting briefly pauses, when we listen to music that absorbs us completely, or watch the ocean until our thoughts blur into its movement. For a moment, the will loosens its grip. We forget ourselves, and in that forgetting, we experience a lighter kind of existence. But it never lasts. The will always returns, reminding us that desire is our native state. A person not born beautiful may watch others loved with ease and know that no amount of virtue, of being kind, of developing a personality will open those same doors. Another may work for years and still live in the shadow of those born under more fortunate stars. It isn't fair, but life never promised to be fair. It simply exists. Schopenhauer thought that there was strength in acknowledging that. The tragedy of life, he said, is not that we suffer, but that we imagine we shouldn't. Once we see that striving and disappointment are the natural rhythm of existence, we stop demanding explanations. We learn to face the world as it is, imperfect, unbalanced, often cruel, and still choose to continue. That, to him, was the beginning of wisdom, to stop demanding that life be otherwise, and to find, within the limits of what we are, a form of peace that doesn't depend on winning. Envy isn't really about possessions or status, it's about being. It's the painful awareness that another person inhabits life more fully than we do, that they move through the world as if they're welcome while we're still waiting at the door. This exposes a truth we spend much of our lives avoiding, that effort, virtue, and determination aren't rewarded equally. Some people experience an ease in life that we will never know. You can do everything right and still struggle, still be left behind while others sail past you, carried by favourable winds. Perhaps they were born beautiful, into happier, more loving families, with circumstances that delivered success from the start. That's the real sting of envy. It's not wishing others harm, but wishing yourself different. We're told that envy should be a fuel, a sign to work harder, but genuine envy resists these platitudes. It reminds us that certain things are beyond reach: beauty, fortune, natural talent. Envy isn't an invitation to transform yourself, it's a confrontation with reality. Most emotions point us towards something we might attain. Envy shows us what we cannot have. The illusion of fairness collapses as we are confronted by the boundary between imagination and reality. And yet, for all its pain, envy is honest. Most of life depends on illusion, the belief that effort will pay off, that good people are rewarded. Envy strips those illusions away. Schopenhauer accepted this not as tragedy, but as fact. The world doesn't deal fairly. It deals blindly. To suffer isn't failure. It's simply the price of seeing the structure of things clearly. He believed that peace begins when illusion ends, when we stop pretending that envy is something to overcome. Most of us live shielded from reality, softened by distraction and hope. Envy shatters that soft focus. It confronts us with the arbitrary way that advantages are distributed, the distance between lives that no amount of effort can close. If this feels unbearable, that's because it is, at least at first. Awareness feels like loss, the loss of comforting stories, of the belief that effort and goodness might bring balance. But when the shock passes, something else appears, a quiet steadiness that comes from no longer negotiating with reality. We stop asking, why them and why not me? We stop treating difference as injustice. It doesn't make the envy disappear, but it lessens its poison. The real wound of envy isn't inequality. It's the belief that inequality is a mistake. Schopenhauer thought wisdom began when that belief died. When you see that the world isn't a moral ledger, but a pattern of chance, indifferent to our wants and expectations, you begin to live without expecting balance. That shift changes everything. It doesn't make life fairer, but it makes it clearer. When you accept this long enough, something changes. You begin to see not just what others have, but what you have too. The small coherence of your life, the fragments that belong only to you. The envy doesn't vanish, but it recedes. You stop flinching from other people's fortune because you've stopped imagining that the universe ever promised equality. To live awake inside the truth is difficult, but it's also freeing. Once you stop waiting for the world to make sense, you can start noticing it as it is, unsystematic, unfair, and still full of worthwhile moments. Schopenhauer never found conventional joy, but he did find a quiet kind of understanding. He accepted that the will couldn't be conquered. At best, it could be quieted temporarily, by moments that pull us outside ourselves. He said there are times when the will loosens its grip, when we listen to music, lose ourselves in art, or feel genuine compassion. In those moments, the will pauses. Compassion in particular had this power, allowing us to stop seeing others as rivals and see them instead as companions in the same condition. Where envy isolates, compassion reconnects. In those rare intervals, we glimpse peace, not the fulfillment of desire, but its temporary suspension, and with it, envy. We forget ourselves. The world stops being something to use or control, and simply becomes something to witness. Yet Schopenhauer never believed these moments could last. They're glimpses, not permanent states. The will always returns, desire reawakens, comparison resumes, envy returns. And so peace, he thought, must come not from escape, but from acceptance, from learning to live lucidly within the structure of things. To accept the world isn't to approve of it, it's to stop fighting its nature, to look at what you lack and stop treating it as an injustice, to realise that the universe wasn't designed with you in mind, and to live with that knowledge without despairing. Acceptance, for Schopenhauer, was a kind of courage, the courage to stop negotiating with fate. Most of us spend years bargaining with reality. If I work hard enough, be a good enough person, then life will reward me. When that bargain fails, we feel betrayed. But the bargain was imaginary. Life never signed it. To stop negotiating is to stop expecting balance between effort and reward. It's to stand before what you lack and still live with dignity. That dignity is the peace that comes when you stop expecting life to be fair. You notice small things again, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of footsteps, the brief companionship of others who are also enduring. And that, for Schopenhauer, was the nearest thing to freedom, not release from suffering, but the ability to face it without illusion. If envy shows us a banquet we cannot join, wisdom lies in how we look at the table. We can rage and be consumed by bitterness, but we can also learn to look without flinching. This doesn't eliminate the hunger, but in accepting that the door won't open, we begin to recover something, the clarity of seeing things as they are. Schopenhauer's wisdom grew from this recognition. He learned to live in proximity to abundance without mistaking it for injustice. The world's unfairness became simply its texture. He stopped demanding that life justify itself, and in that surrender found a form of peace. To look without flinching, that was his final philosophy. Not to romanticize suffering, but to face it without distortion. He once wrote, that a man's happiness, like his health, is in part a gift of nature, and that wisdom lay in recognizing this without envy. If the door is closed to you, raging won't make it open, but neither must you bow your head in shame. You can stand outside, alert and composed. That was the discipline of awareness, to live beside what you cannot have and still see, to acknowledge inequality without hatred and suffering without self-pity, to watch others have what you want and still refuse to let envy corrode your dignity. Schopenhauer reached this state late in life. After decades of obscurity, recognition finally came. Young writers found in his pessimism a truth that their own optimistic age had ignored. He smiled faintly at the attention. The old bitterness had cooled. He no longer needed the world to applaud him. He had learned that applause, like everything else the will desires, only feeds the hunger it pretends to satisfy. Schopenhauer lived quietly in Frankfurt with his poodle, Atma. Each day he took the same walk, read the same newspaper, drank the same coffee. He had come to prefer repetition to novelty, predictability to hope. There was nothing left to chase, and that absence was a kind of calm. One September morning in 1860, he sat down after breakfast, opened a paper, and quietly died in his chair. He was 72. After a life of resentment, his ending was peaceful. No drama, no despair, only the quiet dignity of a man who had stopped demanding that the world make sense. We spend much of our lives in believing that pain exists to be overcome, that every wound contains a lesson. But Schopenhauer would have said that not all pain instructs. Some pain simply reveals. Envy reveals the gap between what we are and what we might have been. It shows us the accidents of birth, the randomness of fortune, the limits we didn't choose but must live within. Most emotions ask us to do something, to fight, to flee, to change. Envy only asks us that we see. And what we see isn't comfortable. We see that the world distributes its gifts without regard for merit, that some doors open for certain people and remain firmly closed to others, not because of virtue or effort, but because of chance. That fairness is a human invention, not a feature of existence. To face that knowledge without retreating into resentment or illusion is its own kind of strength. To accept that effort and goodness don't guarantee reward, to see the unfairness clearly and still rise each day to meet it. This, Schopenhauer believed, was wisdom. Not the wisdom that makes life easier, but the kind that lets you see life clearly and still choose to continue. To live without the comfort of illusions, yet without the paralysis of despair. Schopenhauer never promised that this would make us happy, but he thought it might make us free.